This is the great danger. This is why I say to not hype terrorism, because now this happens. In 2016, there are an estimated 15,696 murders in the United States. This averages to 43 per day. This gunman in Las Vegas supposedly killed 50. In 2016, there are 168 homicides in Las Vegas. So this mass shooting, as bad as it was, only really accounts for less than 30% of 2016's total homicide numbers. Making a big stink out of mass shootings or terrorist attacks is what I call jingle key politics. It's big and flashy, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not very important. It works on low IQ people, but once you pass a certain threshold of intelligence, you get into the IQ range where people will start recognizing that proportionately, terrorism and mass shootings are not a big deal. The first problem with talking about terrorism a whole bunch is that it's dishonest to do so if you know it's not very important. And that matters to me. Truth qua truth isn't everything to me. If all I cared about was truth, I'd be making 4-hour-long videos. But if I didn't care about truth at all, I certainly wouldn't be a white nationalist. The second problem is that there are some people within the 100 to 115 IQ range who are smart enough to figure out that terrorism doesn't matter, but they're not smart enough to realize that terrorism is just a simple thing that low IQ people can understand that is used to get the low IQs to accept a greater truth that has much more complex reasoning behind it. For example, Arabs are bad to have in a country for lots of reasons. They use a whole bunch of welfare, they vote horribly, they don't pay hardly anything in taxes, they destroy public services, and their destruction of towns and neighborhoods down at the capillary level. But for the low info, the low IQ people, it's much easier to just blast terrorism and get them scared in voting for UKIP than it is to give a whole statistical presentations of the downsides of having Arabs in your country. The Democrats use the white racist, the mass shootings, and they play those up to gin up fear among the low IQs to get them voting for the Democrat. Political parties operate at multiple levels on the IQ spectrum, but the 100 to 115 IQ people, the Rick and Morty types, they're smart enough to figure out that terrorism and mass shootings are unimportant and that playing up these things are bullshit, but they're not quite smart enough to realize that it has to be done for any political movement to succeed, and any political movement that doesn't get the fear in order to secure low IQ support, that movement is just plain going to lose.
They'll sell it all the way till I'm in the cell with a guy named Millman, Jerry Millman. And he's got pictures of Hitler and Japanese and things all. I said, boy, Hitler must have been a hell of a guy. He said, Hitler was terrible. I hate him. I hate him. I said, why do you hate him? He said, I'm a Jew. I said, well, why do you enshrine this guy? Is you your daddy? And he looked up to his mother's fear. And his mother's fear was Hitler. Hitler was like his father figure. He loved Hitler, but he hated Hitler. He needed Hitler to hold him up, because Hitler was holding his hate up, because without his hate, he didn't exist. He didn't have no reason to live unless he had some hate. He didn't have any reason to buy and sell unless the money held him up. If you took the money away from him, you took the hate away from him, he'd be gone. So how do you communicate to a whole group of people? You stand up and you take the worst fear symbol there is and say, there, now I've got your fear. Now I've got your fear. And your fear is your power, and your power is your control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world through Atwa.
That's just the truth of it. If you can't gin up fear to get the low IQ supporting you, then you're just going to lose. That's why the Republicans play up terrorism. That's why the Democrats play up mass shootings. The third problem with playing up terrorism and mass shootings is that, let's say a bunch of whites started tactical bull cutting all over the place out of all of a sudden. If I had made such a big stink about Arab terrorism, I would now have to condemn whites for their terrorism in order to be consistent, even though the whole thing is not very important. If I were to say, oh, well, whites doing 10 times as much terrorism as they had previously is still virtually nothing, so it doesn't matter. I would have to reveal that all along I knew that this terrorism stuff didn't really actually matter. As of making this video, whatever motivations Stephen Paddock, who's one of those PH Stevens, may have had are unknown by me. He was an old white man with guns, which lends to him being a Trump supporter. However, he had a Southeast Asian wife, and the people he killed were at a country music concert, and the people who knew him say he wasn't political. But say this guy turns out to have been a big Trump supporter. Well, you had Bush and now Trump running around saying that they're going to be hard on terrorism. Oh, that magic word, terrorism. And then terrorism gets linguistically and cognitively meshed with extremism. And if you have an IQ above room temperature, you can probably see where this is going. Extreme just means that you fall outside of the spectrum of Bill Kristol and Nancy Pelosi. And so here's how this game works. The triangle of shit, media, government, and the universities, are all doing their shitty things. They're destroying the schools, they're destroying medicine, they're destroying your ability to get a job, they're destroying your ability to hire someone, destroying your ability to fire someone, which makes you leery about hiring anyone, making ever more arcane and obscure rules as to what you can do on your own property. People who just make it hard for you to do anything, to where your life just becomes a giant escort quest for the government. And they do all this while making the most pious noises and the most serious faces in the process. Oh, and by the way, it's white people like you who are the cause of all the problems in the US today. If we just had black, lesbian, trans women running everything, then everything would be fantastic. There are a bunch of people who have real criticism of this, and I mean foundational criticism. People who oppose multiracialism, not the cucked multiculturalism, not the cucked opposition to multiculturalism or culture or traditions or whatever that. No, they oppose multiple biological races in the same political unit. They oppose this kind of globalist governance. Globalist governance basically meaning a whole bunch of who knows what interests, a bunch of companies, a bunch of organizations, and a bunch of student body council-like people get in charge of government instead of the actual people of the country, and as a result proceed to run the country into the ground, and people who are opposed to the United States itself. You get some real foundational opposition to what's going on. And let's say you have a foundational skepticism of the whole racial narrative, about slavery, about segregation, about white privilege, about the supposed genocide of Native Americans, about the Civil War, or how Congress had to use military governments to pass a law granting black citizenship. And then when you deconstruct these anti-white narratives and then point out the extreme anti-white policies at universities, at corporations, in government, in media, and that all of this hate is founded upon lies, well, people who figure this out are going to get mad. And some people are already unstable. In any population that you draw a circle around, they're going to be unstable. And this pushes them over the edge, and then you get tactical bowl cut and another guy trying to get the high score. But for milquetoast establishment types, Paul Ryan, John Kasich, Nancy Pelosi, moderate Republicans, and moderate Democrats, rather fewer of those, things are going their way. Their lifestyles are well taken for, and people who think along their lines, or people who don't think much at all and just vote in their direction, they're not angry. In other words, people who have angry political beliefs are the ones most likely to snap and do something that they'll never regret. This is the terrorism, quote unquote. And to defeat terrorism, well, you must defeat the ideology of terrorism, which is the extremism that breeds the terrorism. But this extremism is just that which creates anger in people, causing a few of them to lose it and go on the shooting sprees, which is to say, it is the foundational criticism of the way things are. Which begs the question, who's the terrorist? Who's the anti-terrorist? If someone is destroying your people and destroying their lives and using a bunch of lies to justify it, and are specifically targeting your people for destruction, and then demand that you respect them and treat them politely, well, guess what? Someone who has figured this out is going to get mad, and a few of those mad people will lose control. Stephen Paddock in particular, who knows what his deal was. But to ban or try to sully ideas just because they lead to the occasional mass shootings is to ban foundational criticism. Criticism that actually challenges. I want to end on this, which is a preview of the bad end for the United States. Paddock's kill-death ratio was 50-1. When Timothy McVeigh, who killed 168 people in the Oklahoma City bombing, was about to be executed, he reportedly said, quote, 168-1. I still win. Whether he actually said that or not is immaterial. The fact is that distributed attacks among the general population can produce nightmarish kill-death ratios. I don't want to go on for too much longer here, but if there were to be a civil war in the United States, the idea that it would be two armies squaring off is a joke. It would be 10,000 Timothy McVeighs of all political persuasions, except a lot more competent and a lot more organized. 10,000 organized terrorists that aren't just randomly snack barring or randomly tactical bull goal cutting, but are present of mind, professional killers. They could, in my estimation, kill 30 million people easy. Now, I think we're still a long way from that. But then again, I predict that things in the US will spiral out of control very slowly and then all at once. Since the public won't support an organized partition and the sacrifices that partition entails until things get bad enough to where they have nothing to lose, well, the trick will be to get partition going while things are getting really bad, but before the government has been completely decapitated and the government has been rendered unable to exert control over the area. Otherwise, you're going to have disorganized partition, and that's 1,000,001 variables that each faction is dealing with, both inside and outside their movements, with mass population transfers and the inevitable use of force against the holdouts, disagreements between the factions as to how the population transfers and the territory is supposed to be divvied up. A disorganized partition would be a very unhappy thing and would lead to a lot of bad blood for generations to come. That's the bad end for the United States. So these kill-death ratios, this is a warning. Now, people are going to make a bunch of noise about this one event in Vegas, and the really clueless are going to talk about gun control, even though the guns that Paddock used were illegal. You know the whole song and dance. You know what they're going to do on this. But there's a much bigger thing going on.